6:14 a.m., February 19th, 2026. Bakersfield, California. A storage unit auction coordinator named Gerald Marsh unlocked Unit 447 at StoreQuest Self-Storage on Panama Lane. He had done this hundreds of times. Abandoned units. Unclaimed property. The paperwork was routine. The winning bidder, a salvage reseller named Carla Dunning, had paid $275 for the blind lot. She pulled the rolling door open. Total estimated value of contents, $340,000 in mixed currency. Alone. Marsh photographed the interior before anyone touched anything. Standard protocol. What the photos showed, 4 dozen prepaid burner phones in original packaging, 3 composition notebooks sealed in a Ziploc bag, a green canvas duffel containing bundled cash, a sealed plastic storage bin, the kind sold at Target for $12.99, a second duffel, a cardboard box wrapped in duct tape, and stacked against the back wall, folded flat and tied with nylon cord, a series of laminated sheets with handwritten columns. The unit smelled of mildew and old cardboard. The fluorescent light flickered twice when Marsh pulled the cord. He later told detectives that the first thing that registered was how organized it all was. Not chaotic like most abandoned units, not the debris of a life interrupted. It looked staged, deliberate, like someone had packed it expecting to come back. Carla Dunning stepped back outside and called 911 at 6:31 a.m. Kern County Sheriff's deputies arrived at 7:04 a.m. The first deputy on scene, a 7-year veteran named Deputy T. Ruiz, photographed the bin, noted the composition notebooks, and immediately radioed his supervisor. By 8:15 a.m., the unit was sealed with evidence tape. By 9:40 a.m., the Kern County Sheriff's Detective Unit had contacted the FBI field office in Fresno. The unit had been abandoned since 2014. The man who had last paid rent on it, a naturalized U.S. citizen named Esteban Mora, a farm labor contractor operating out of Delano, had died of a cardiac event in March 2021. His name was on the lease. His forwarding address had never been updated. When StoreQuest's automated delinquency process cleared the account backlog in January 2026, the unit had been flagged for auction after 12 years of accumulated fees. Nobody had looked inside since the day Esteban Mora last walked away. What was in that plastic bin would take federal investigators 4 months to fully trace. Within 48 hours of Carla Dunning's 911 call, HSI, Homeland Security Investigations, and the FBI's Organized Crime Task Force had assumed jurisdiction. The Kern County Sheriff's detective who caught the initial call, a 10-year investigator named Detective Adriana Calles, had documented the contents with clinical precision. The composition notebooks contained ledger entries in 3 languages, Spanish, English, and what analysts later identified as a Mixtec dialect. The columns tracked names, phone numbers, payment dates, and amounts. Each entry was assigned a code that appeared to correspond to a specific case or individual. The burner phones, 44 of them in total, had never been activated. The cash in the bin and the 2 duffel bags was counted, sorted, and logged. Mixed currency, U.S. dollars, Mexican pesos, and Guatemalan quetzals. Total, $341,200 after conversion. Bundled in denominations consistent with cash payments at retail money transfer locations. A detail in the ledgers caught the attention of FBI analyst Renato Ochoa during the second day of review. 1 column header, repeated across all 3 notebooks, translated roughly as collection confirmed. It appeared 94 times. Next to each entry, a date, a dollar amount, and a 3-digit code. The amounts ranged from $8,000 to $67,000. Ochoa cross-referenced the 3-digit codes against a secondary column that appeared to track phone numbers. The phone numbers corresponded to 19 distinct area codes, all in California's Central Valley. She pulled the ledger back and looked at the structure of the entries. These weren't business transactions. The structure, the amounts, the encrypted naming convention, the pattern of confirmed and released columns. They matched a payment for release schema. Someone had been tracking ransom payments, and they had been meticulous about it. Ochoa spent the better part of 6 hours cross-referencing the 3 notebooks side by side, mapping which codes appeared in multiple volumes and which were unique to a single ledger. What she found was a chronological progression. The handwriting in the first notebook was neater, more careful. The third showed a looser hand, faster entries, a system so internalized the person recording it no longer needed to think about it. They had been doing this for years. It had become routine. The most surprising thing about the storage unit wasn't the cash. It was the organization. Whoever maintained these ledgers had been running something that looked, from the inside, like a structured business. FBI Special Agent Marcus Webb was assigned as lead on the case on February 21st, 2026, 2 days after the unit was opened. Webb had spent 11 years working organised crime cases out of the Fresno field office. He had worked cartel-adjacent cases, labour trafficking cases, and one prior extortion ring that had operated out of Stockton between 2017 and 2020. He understood the agricultural worker ecosystem of the Central Valley, the labour pipelines, the community structures, the deep institutional distrust of law enforcement that made these communities specifically vulnerable. When he reviewed Ochoa's analysis, he recognized the pattern immediately. These families were targeted. Webb told the task force at the first full briefing. This is not random. Whoever built this list knew which families had children in the fields, which families were undocumented or had mixed status households, and which families would pay without calling police. The 19 area codes corresponded to specific agricultural corridors. Tulare County, Kings County, Fresno County, Madera County. The years covered in the ledgers ran from 2013 to at least 2019 based on the dates visible in the entries. Some entries had notations that Webb's team interpreted as release confirmed. Others, 7 of them, had a notation that translated as case open. 7 entries with no resolution. Webb's team began matching the 94 ledger entries against reported cases. They started with the obvious: Kern County missing persons, Tulare County missing persons, Kings County. They expanded to runaway reports, because families who feared deportation often reported missing children as runaways rather than abductions. What they found in those records was a pattern that had been sitting, unconnected, for more than a decade. Between 2013 and 2019, Kern, Tulare, Kings, and Fresno counties had collectively recorded 31 cases of minors from agricultural worker families who had gone missing and then returned home. In most cases, families had declined to provide detailed statements. In most cases, the files noted family did not cooperate with follow-up investigation. In most cases, the cases were coded as runaways who had voluntarily returned. None of the cases had been formally connected to each other. None had been flagged as potential kidnapping for ransom. There's a line in one of the case files, from a Tulare County report dated November 2014, that reads almost like fiction. A 9-year-old girl had been missing for 31 days. When she returned, the family told deputies she had gone to stay with relatives. The deputies noted they were unable to confirm this. The file was closed 2 weeks later. That 9-year-old girl was now 19 years old. And her case number appeared in the storage unit ledger. The FBI contacted Tulare County Sheriffs on February 24th, then Fresno, then Kings, then Kern. What followed was not the orderly unspooling of a cold case. It was the simultaneous reopening of more than 24 files that had never been properly opened in the first place. The ransom ring had operated with a logic that investigators found disturbing specifically because of its precision. It was not opportunistic. It was not random. The families targeted, 19 confirmed by February 2026, more under review, had been selected based on a specific profile. HSI analysts reconstructed the selection criteria from the ledgers and from interviews conducted in late February and March 2026. The families had several consistent characteristics. Nearly all were agricultural workers with seasonal employment patterns. Nearly all had at least one family member with uncertain immigration status. Nearly all lived in rural or semi-rural locations more than 30 minutes from major law enforcement stations. And all of them had children between the ages of 7 and 16 who moved between school and farm labour locations during harvest season. The ring had identified these families deliberately. Someone had access to community structures, labour contractor networks, church rosters, informal mutual aid organisations that let them map vulnerability in advance. Esteban Mora, the dead man whose name was on the storage unit lease, had been a farm labour contractor operating in the Delano area since approximately 2008. His business, registered under the name Central Valley Labour Associates, had contracts with multiple mid-size agricultural operations across 3 counties. He had legal access to the names, family compositions, and employment patterns of hundreds of agricultural worker families. He had used that access as a targeting mechanism. Webb's team established that within the first week of March 2026. What they didn't yet know was who had operated the network with him and whether it had continued after his death in 2021. The answer came from an unexpected direction. Put yourself in Detective Adriana Coles' position for a moment. She had been the first detective on scene at the storage unit. She had written the initial report, and in the days after the FBI assumed jurisdiction, she had pulled a file from her own desk. a case she had worked briefly in 2022 that she now saw differently. In 2022, a family in Fresno County had reported their 13-year-old son missing. He had returned home after 9 days. The family refused to cooperate with follow-up. The case was coded as a voluntary runaway return. Standard closure. Coles had worked it for a week before it was reassigned. What she remembered, now that she was looking at the ledger structures from the storage unit, was a specific detail from that 2022 case. The family, in their initial report, had mentioned they had been contacted by someone who spoke to them in Mixtec, not Spanish. The caller had given them specific wire transfer instructions. MoneyGram. A Walmart money center location in Visalia. That detail had not made it into the final case summary. She called Webb on March 3rd, 2026. That phone call added the 2022 case to the active investigation. It also pointed to something more significant. The operation had not stopped when Esteban Mora died in 2021. It had continued, under a different name, with different operators. Webb's team opened a parallel investigation thread. They were now looking for an active organization, not just a historical one. HSI financial intelligence analysts pulled MoneyGram and Western Union records associated with the phone numbers in the ledger. A federal magistrate in Fresno issued subpoenas on March 7th, 2026. The records showed a pattern of wire transfers to a cluster of accounts, most in California, some with connections to accounts in Jalisco and Oaxaca. One account stood out. It had received transfers consistent with the ledger's confirmed collection entries across multiple years, and it was still active. The account was held by a business entity registered in Fresno County in 2022. The business name, Valley-Wide Agricultural Consulting, LLC. The registered agent, a man named Marco Ibarra, age 41, listed with a residential address in northwest Fresno. Marco Ibarra had worked for Central Valley Labor Associates. He had been Esteban Mora's operations manager between 2011 and 2018. The raid on the storage unit had been February 19th. By March 10th, Marco Ibarra was under active federal surveillance. There is a detail that stayed with investigators for weeks after the case broke open. When HSI agents began reviewing Ibarra's communications, they found that he had been in contact with a Kern County detective. Not to report anything. Not to cooperate. The contact was social. The two had grown up in the same town in Kings County, attended the same high school. But the timing of two of those communications, both in 2015, corresponded almost exactly with the dates on which two specific Kern County case files had been reassigned and closed without follow-up. It was not evidence of a crime. Prosecutors later declined to file any charges in connection with the communication, but the details stayed in the file. What this case tells us about these communities' structural vulnerability goes beyond the specific ring that exploited it. Mora and his associates didn't create the vulnerability. They found it where it already existed, in the gap between institutional trust and institutional access. Families who needed law enforcement couldn't risk involving law enforcement. That gap was the product itself. The warrant situation was perhaps the most operationally significant thing investigators discovered in March and April 2026. In 2015, a Kern County Sheriff's detective named Raymond Lucero had been assigned a cluster of agricultural worker family cases. 3 cases, all involving missing children who had returned home without explanation, all in Kern County. Lucero had noticed the payment pattern. The MoneyGram transfers, the Walmart money center locations, the Mixtec language contact with families. He had drafted a warrant application requesting phone records and financial data associated with a number in the ledger's predecessor, a physical notepad recovered from one of the family's addresses during an early case visit. The warrant application had been submitted to the Kern County District Attorney's Office in November 2015. It came back without approval, classified as insufficient probable cause. Lucero revised it and resubmitted in January 2016. It came back again. In March 2016, Lucero was reassigned to a different unit, property crimes, as part of a department restructuring. The warrant file was placed in a physical storage archive. Not digitized. Not reassigned. Stored. When Kern County sheriffs pulled the archived files in response to the FBI's February 2026 request, Lucero's warrant applications were still in the folder, untouched since 2016. The warrant Lucero had drafted in 2015, updated by the Fresno Federal Magistrate's Office in March 2026 and augmented with 11 years of additional evidence, was finally served on March 19, 2026, 11 years late. We'll say what most won't. The 2015 warrant refusal is the most damning document in this case. Lucero had identified the pattern. He had the probable cause. The system didn't fail because the evidence wasn't there. It failed because the evidence involved victims who the institutional structure had already decided weren't worth the paperwork. Ibarra had not been working alone after Mora's death. HSI surveillance through March and early April 2026 identified 2 additional associates operating under the valley-wide agricultural consulting umbrella. A man named Fausto Reyes, age 38, living in Talara, and a woman named Sylvia Coda, age 44, operating out of Modesto, who managed the financial accounts. A 4th individual, a logistics coordinator who operated under the surname Delgado, first name unknown, believed to be operating out of the San Joaquin Valley, was identified through the communications records but not located before the arrests. The investigation also identified 2 additional individuals connected to the pre-2021 operation who had since relocated. One had a known address in Texas. One was believed to be in Mexico. That brought the confirmed network to 6 US-based individuals, plus the fugitive and the unlocated Delgado. The decision was made to move on arrests before any additional subjects could be alerted. Here's the part that doesn't make sense on the surface. HSI had been conducting surveillance for more than 5 weeks before the arrest warrants were executed. 5 weeks is a long time to hold a surveillance posture without detection. What extended the timeline was not caution. It was a technical failure. The primary wiretap authorization on Ibarra's secondary phone, the one he used for operational communications, experienced a certification error that required reapplication. 8 days were lost. Those 8 days, investigators later assessed, may have given Ibarra enough time to alert Delgado, who appears to have gone dark approximately 10 days before the arrest operation. During those 5 weeks of surveillance, agents logged Ibarra's daily movements with the kind of granular detail that only sustained physical observation produces. He drove the same route to a Fresno coffee shop 3 mornings a week. He met Reyes twice at a parking lot behind a farm supply store in Selma. He made calls from a gas station payphone on Blackstone Avenue, a payphone, in 2026, on at least 4 occasions. The operational discipline was notable. He had learned from Mora. He understood what left traces and what didn't. The arrest warrants were executed simultaneously on the morning of April 29, 2026, 4:47 a.m. April 29, 2026. Fresno, California. 14 HSI agents and 6 Fresno PD officers approached a residential address in the Tower District neighborhood where Marco Ibarra had been living under the valley-wide business registration. The front team was in position at 4:47 a.m. Entry was made at 4:51 a.m. after a no answer on the door knock protocol. Ibarra was found in the kitchen. He did not resist. He was taken into custody at 4:53 a.m. Simultaneous operations, Tular, where a 4-agent team located Fausto Reyes at a mobile home on the eastern edge of the city. Modesto, where a 6-agent HSI team coordinated with Stanislaus County Sheriffs to execute at the address listed for Sylvia Coda. Both Reyes and Coda were taken into custody without incident. 3 additional individuals connected to the pre-2021 network, picked up in Bakersfield, Visalia, and Stockton respectively, were arrested through coordinated Kern County and Fresno County operations under concurrent state warrants. 6 arrests. Total elapsed time from first entry to last confirmed custody, 39 minutes. In the Ibarra residence, agents found 2 laptops, a secondary ledger in a format consistent with the storage unit notebooks, 3 prepaid phones, and $17,400 in cash in a kitchen drawer. A locked box in the bedroom closet contained a single burner phone with a partially deleted contacts list. Data recovery would later extract 14 numbers from that phone. 6 of those numbers appeared in the original storage unit ledgers. The arrests on April 29th were public within hours. Kern County Sheriffs issued a statement. HSI issued a statement. The FBI field office in Fresno issued a statement. The case was described publicly as a ransom extortion ring targeting agricultural worker communities. The statements included the confirmed number of victims, 19 families, 22 children. What the statements did not include, what would come later, was the reclassification of case status for 3 specific children. 3 of the individuals who had been listed in original county case files as runaway returns were now, based on the ledger evidence and family interviews conducted through April 2026, reclassified as human trafficking victims under federal statute. 2 girls and 1 boy, ages at time of incident ranging from 9 to 14. Their cases were transferred to federal victim services. Those 3 reclassifications meant that their files, closed between 2014 and 2017, became federal human trafficking cases 12 years after the fact. Victim advocates working with HSI noted that the reclassification mattered for reasons beyond legal category. It changed what resources the individuals were eligible for. It changed what records could be expunged. And it changed, In the formal institutional record, what had happened to them? What do you think? Did the system fail these 3 children when it closed their cases as runaway returns? Or was this the inevitable result of how these communities were positioned relative to law enforcement? The answer most investigators gave privately was that it was both. The failure was systematic and it was specific. The charging documents filed in the Eastern District of California on May 2nd, 2026 listed Ibarra as the primary defendant, with Reyes and Cota as co-defendants. The charges included conspiracy to commit extortion, wire fraud, money laundering, and federal human trafficking violations. The 3 additional state-arrested defendants faced parallel state charges with federal referral pending. Ibarra's attorney entered a not guilty plea on May 8th. Trial date was set for October 2026. Reyes and Cota, through separate counsel, entered not guilty pleas as well. By late May, Cota's defense team had initiated cooperation discussions with prosecutors. The cooperation track produced additional information in June 2026. Specifically, the identity of the individual operating as Delgado. According to Cota's proffer sessions, Delgado was a logistics coordinator who had handled the physical custody logistics, the locations where children had been held, for at least the post-2021 phase of the operation. She identified him as a man in his mid-40s operating out of the Fresno-Madera county line area. She provided a partial description and a vehicle registration linked to a name that HSI ran immediately. By June 12, 2026, that name was on an active federal fugitive warrant. He had not been located as of the date of this reporting. The locations where children had been held during the extortion period remained partially unknown. The ledgers tracked financial transactions and case codes. They did not specify holding locations. Family interviews, conducted under HSI victim services, protocols, provided some information for some cases. But for a significant portion of the 22 confirmed victims, the physical circumstances of their captivity were not fully documented. What investigators established with certainty, children had been held for periods ranging from 11 days to 4 months. In at least 3 cases, the period of captivity exceeded 60 days. The families had paid. The children had been returned. No family had contacted law enforcement during the period of captivity. The $890,000 estimated total collected across the operation had been partially recovered. The $341,200 from the storage unit, approximately $60,000 from Ibarra's accounts, additional funds under review in the financial investigation. Roughly $490,000 remained unaccounted for. Some portion of it had moved through the Jalisco and Oaxaca accounts. Those accounts were under review through mutual legal assistance channels, but international financial recovery from those jurisdictions moved slowly and was not expected to produce results quickly. The money that had been paid, largely by agricultural worker families making $14,000 to $28,000 per year to recover their own children. Most of it was gone. Comment why yes or no. Will we see another case like this one surface in the Central Valley before 2030? Because the structures that made this possible haven't changed. Detective Raymond Lucero, the Kern County investigator who had drafted the 2015 warrant application and been reassigned before it was acted on, was reached by press in May 2026. He declined extensive comment. He confirmed he was aware of the case. He had retired from Kern County Sheriff's in 2022. His warrant application, filed in late 2015 and returned twice without approval, was cited in the federal charging documents as a foundational investigative document. The Kern County District Attorney's Office, asked about the 2015 warrant refusals, stated that all case determinations had been made consistent with the information available at the time and that the office had fully cooperated with the 2026 federal investigation. The storage unit at StoreQuest on Panama Lane was released from evidence hold on June 3, 2026. There was nothing left inside it. The rolling door came down. The lock went back on. Gerald Marsh, the auction coordinator who had unlocked it on February 19th, told a local newspaper that he had not auctioned any units since. He said he needed some time. Carla Dunning, the salvage buyer who had paid $275 for the blind lot, received no compensation for the unit she never got to clear. Under California law, once law enforcement assumes jurisdiction, the contents are forfeited for evidence. She filed a small claims request with Kern County and was told to wait. The 6 arrested individuals were in custody or released on bond, pending trial. The fugitive named on the warrant issued in June was not in custody. 3 children who had spent between 11 days and 4 months in captivity, and who for years afterward had been classified, officially, as kids who ran away, now had a different word in their files. What that word does for them at 23 or 27 or 34 years old, when those files follow them in ways they might not even know yet, is something the indictments don't address. The warrant Lucero drafted in 2015 was finally executed 11 years later. The demand that made a warrant necessary in the first place, the targeting of the most isolated communities, the ones least likely to call for help, still exists. In the Central Valley and in dozens of corridors like it, that gap between institutional trust and institutional access remains open. The network is dismantled. The demand that created it is not. If you want to follow the Ibarra trial as it develops through October, subscribe. We'll be covering it here on Cold Warrant. Every case file, every court date.